everybody. My name is Ed Evans. I'm the chair of the BCS Data Management Special Interest Group, and I wanted to welcome you to our final session in this week's Diversity in Data conference. Diversity in Data conference has been co-sponsored by the BCS Data team, BCS Women and Dharma UK. It's been a fantastic week. We were interested in bringing people to talk about the different aspects of diversity in data, so focused around data, but the different aspects of it. So we were able to have presentations around bringing people into different data roles to show that data is not just about technology, that there's a lot of different aspects to it as well. And we're aware of we heard this morning about the growing challenge of ensuring our data sets are more representative and guarding against bias. And we've looked at each of those dimensions. I wanted to thank the people who have spoken this week, some of whom are joining us on the panel today. So, I want to thank Tristi and Prerna, Dr. Prerna, Jenny, Grace and Marco Tosin did a fantastic presentation. Paul and Roisin and the collected people from Grace was inspirational. Gen Z, Kat and Kyle, and then Lisa this morning, and then this afternoon we've got Tristi, Prerna, and Lisa, hosted by Nic Granger, who Nic is part of our BCS team too. And thanks also to all the people who've been hosting these, sort of behind the scenes or helping us out in the production. So it's all worked very well. Just to sort of reflect on this week. So we got this panel discussion. We're going to be talking about the concepts of diversity in data and what we've heard this week. And there were lots of opportunities, questions. Please put them in the Q&A. We're recording the session as we speak, and the recording will be available within a couple of weeks from the BCS DMSU website. So just a reminder of the people we're hearing from today. So Nic is going to be chairing the panel, and Nic's focused her career on data analysis. I don't need to read the details there, but Nic is part of the BCS data management team as well, and as a senior position within the UK government in the director of corporate for North Sea Transition Authority. We're going to hear again from Tristi, who spoke on Monday about the sneaky curvy path that winds its way along people's careers and how you avoid from falling off the side. And we're going to hear again from Dr. Prerna, who works for the University of Bedfordshire and talked about analytics and looking at it from an HR perspective. How to make HR a little bit more analytical and a bit more systematic with using tools and analytics approaches. And Lisa, who we heard from this morning again. Lisa works with me here at the Open Data Institute. So I'm going to hand over to those guys, just to let you know that all these four excellent speakers have all offered to carry on the discussion, carry on the dialogue following this. So connect via LinkedIn, listen on Twitter, get involved, and share your perspectives. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Nic. All over to you, Nic.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for the summary of the talks of this week. So what we wanted to do in this panel was touch on some of those topics that you've been hearing from the different speakers and just kind of sum up on our reflections of the different aspects of diversity in data that we've covered. So as we talk, feel free to put questions into the Q&A tab. We've got some questions here as well to sort of start off the conversation, but we will jump to any questions that come in during the panel on the Q&A tab. So we're going to start just with a kind of general question. So I'm going to ask Lisa first and then ask the other two. When you heard the conference title in terms of diversity in data, what was your first thought? What did you think of at that point?
Oh, well, my mind races. I always say that I do like mind putty and think out loud. So when I was talking about it with Ed, I first started by thinking, well, what do you mean diversity in the profession? So do you mean the different types of roles there are? Do you mean like analytics, data governance, AI, standards? What do you, is that one of them? And then I thought actually about the diversity in the data itself and bias, what I spoke about this morning. And then the other aspect I thought about was actually like the neurodiversity in the teams. So I've managed data teams for many years now, and actually what makes a really great team is that neural diversity too. So anything from autism, dyslexia, and thinking differently about these things. So yeah, for me, it was quite a, well, poor Ed, as I started going everywhere in what I thought of that.
Thanks, Lisa. And Prerna, how about you? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I heard that term, diversity in data, immediately wearing my human resource management hat, I started looking at the concept from different angles, from a human resource perspective, and to be more precise, what I call is as inclusalytics, the inclusivity and analytics of data. And when you look at our employee life cycle, during the entire life cycle of our employee, we gather a lot of data. When you join the organization, we gather data about your skills, about your education, about your ethnicity, and everything we gather data about. And then we gather data about your salary structure, about your promotions, about your performance, if you had any grievances, or your various kind of data about your emotions, about cultural surveys and whatnot. So that data is there within the organization. And when you exit the organization, a lot of data is gathered. And I thought that, that is the variation in data. And that is what I would have loved to look at, a human resources data from entire life cycle of any employee.
Thanks, and a completely different set of diversity and data thoughts there. How about you, Tristi?
Well, on the beautiful side, to me, diversity in data would be like a symphony, right? It's a beautiful blend of all of the different attributes and contributions that part of the symphony would bring together. And then on the flip side, I go, actually, it's more for me, the challenges of datafication of society, right? And so actually what we talk about, who's represented, how their representation is interpreted by whom, how you're categorized, and all of the complexities that come with that. So in some ways, we kind of look at it as, the inside of an organization, as Prerna was just talking about, you're talking about workforce data, but also within that, you've got individuals and identities, right? Which in the workplace is very different than when you're in society and you have your other passions and purposes that make up who you are. And when I put on my NHS hat, those are the population cohorts. And you talk about health data and you think, oh, do we need to separate it in these different ways? Because actually that's part of the beautiful thing of a symphony, is that you bring all of these different qualities and aspects together, which is not quite how it seems to work in some of the different examples that I heard throughout the week. So yes, I think the challenge we have is helping to get to the symphony, because I think at the moment it feels sometimes a little bit more like the sound of a car crash when we talk about bias and assumptions.
Absolutely, and I guess we're seeing the topic evolving over time. How are you seeing things changing, Tristi, in your kind of area?
I love the fact, at least in the health space, that I'm hearing more about how we might tackle or incorporate inclusion in our practices in the workplace. I think this is a huge, nice straight line, if you like, in the curvy path of my career, because most of the time, there would be no talk about diversity or inclusion in the early parts of my career. And the explosion of the different types of networks for support and career development, respecting diversity and inclusion as a key competitive advantage, actually, for some organizations is massive. And at the same time, I'm also seeing this kind of pushback. And I say pushback because there are so many competing pressures and priorities at the moment that actually, when you have that, you must choose what you're going to do next, right? You must prioritize. And quite often when you feel that kind of pressure from many different angles, you tend to revert to the way you've always done something, which may not be very inclusive, which may not lead to belonging, but actually, continue on that other path of not including diverse voices and perspectives, and continuing the learning process because you head down. I said both.
No, so there is a lot of change, isn't there? And we heard earlier in the week about sort of embracing data for ED&I initiatives. Prerna, what do you think organisations should be doing to start to embrace the topic?
Yeah, we have seen with Equality Act, things have changed a lot, and cases like George Floyd and Me Too movement have kind of brought a lot of momentum to equality and diversity and inclusion. And we are in a global world where people are moving across locations, across boundaries, and organizations have actually started realizing the business value of having diverse workforce. And we have seen that it works in practice. In my presentation also, I gave examples of Deutsche Bank, and I gave examples of Tesco and various other organizations. So organizations need to kind of understand the strong business case of having a diverse workforce, and also get support from leadership. And more importantly, we all have a lot of data within the organization, which is the people data, and that people data creates a lot of value. So having a snapshot of your data is the starting point for organizations, and we all collect a lot of data. And with technology advancement, we could use various models, various technologies, techniques, AI, to kind of model that data and use that data for our competitive advantage.
Great, thank you. And you just mentioned AI there. So I'm going to ask you the next question as well, Prerna, which is, how do you see AI improving diversity in data?
AI is actually, to be honest, AI is technology agnostic. It is data agnostic. It's how you train that AI is more important. Yeah. So involving the involved parties or the stakeholders in developing those AI algorithms is the first point to look at. Also making sure that you test your AI algorithm robustly and take the feedback of your end user, because you may have a sophisticated AI tool, but if the end user perspective is not taken into account, that's not going to work. So I would summarize is, create like an ecosystem to develop your AI algorithms, do robust testing, and also take end user feedback about applicability of your AI tool. That is how I would start with.
Thank you. And Lisa, you talked this morning about ethics and the frameworks that you can use. And I guess those are particularly applicable with, the generative AI that we're starting to see. Are there the improvements versus challenges from your point of view? Is the balance about right?
So I don't think the balance is right at the moment, just because the data that's being fed to the AI. I think we all have to acknowledge the data is biased, and that's because each of us contain biases. I don't think there's ever going to be like that perfect data set that's not biased, but actually it's how do you overcome that and understand and get the teams together to make sure actually you're mitigating as much as you can the frameworks you can put in place. Because I suppose there's a difference between you're really trying hard to mitigate it, and there's some biases that are in there naturally because you can't get a diverse enough data set, or you can't go to every single person on the planet, can you, to then get their views to then use it. From then when you're blindly walking into it or just testing it on one segment of the population or one type. I mean, I always find it fascinating now. It's only within the last year that we've had car testing that's included women and children. Up until that point, women and kids were more likely to die in a car accident. You're just like, really? It's 2023. So there's stuff that you can do now when you're thinking about that data and making sure you're representing different parts of society when you're using it. But yeah, I think there's going to be a limit. So are we okay now? I'd say no. I think we need to do more work. The teams need to definitely look, especially about what they're feeding their AI. and try as hard as possible to mitigate those biases, because algorithms only amplify bias, and that makes it worse. So that's quite a scary world if we're just using a very small subset and then just predicting that for everybody else. That's not a great place to be.
Nic, I would like to add on what Lisa said, like one demographic cannot determine whether that AI would be useful for the entire demographic of our society. So the AI algorithm has to be reflection of the society in which we are living in.
Absolutely. And I think that goes to the point that Tristi's just put in the chat in terms of digital exclusion and the digital divide. Did you want to enlarge on that at all, Tristi?
I just wanted to chip in on Ed's very timely comment there about participation is very important. And when we think about participation, if I'm gonna use the same 80-20 rule, 80% of the population might be online. What about that 20%? And I'd say the digital divides existed for well over 20 years. It's been around a long time, ever since the introduction and the consumerization of technology. What you see are people may have certain things, but they don't have the range of dimensions for digital inclusion to occur. Therefore, I was going to chip in and just say, hey, Ed, actually, what we need to make clear is that not everyone is participating. And when we think especially about health inequalities, do we understand when we're trying to do digital transformation that we've thought about those digital inequalities that might prevent people from accessing services when we go a digital first way? And that can apply in the public sector, but equally for those firms that are trying to innovate to reach different parts of the market. I think I'm talking about the parts of the market that aren't recognized by the market itself, right? They're unemployed, they've got ill health, maybe they're carers, maybe they're new to the country, they're migrants, so they're not recognized as part of the target market. So something to think about there as we speed up some of our data efforts.
Absolutely. And thinking about the target market in terms of diversity is important, but also the people that are delivering on the data and the sort of digital tools as well. I mean, you talked earlier in the week about the kind of curvy career path, and I know we had other speakers sort of talking about the importance of just generally diversity in data careers, from neurodiversity to those kind of career paths and how people move through those paths. How do you think, Tristi, that we can encourage that greater diversity in the data careers themselves?
There were some great points from Grace, and I love the fact that they also brought in the younger generation, so the Gen Z, because their view of technology and digital is completely different from mine. I've got two teenagers, right? They live, eat, and breathe the internet. If it's not working, I think I've broken something in the world, right? It's more important than food at times. So their relationship with these technologies is quite different. I think there's something to be said about neurodiversity that I just wanted to chip in from kind of the health side, which is that I think for this to be better understood by neurotypical folks, is that there's a range of qualities and characteristics. And I think for those that identify as being neurodiverse, it's making sure that those colleagues that you work with, or the companies or organizations you want to work with, have a clear understanding of what it means as well. Sometimes there's an over-reliance on diagnosis. So again, if you don't have a diagnosis, somehow you're not, or you are. And I think that there's probably work to be done there, because I don't think it requires a diagnosis, but also a recognition that the way we do recruitment, the way we do retention, and the way we do progression, it's fundamentally rethought, because it does actually tend to flow in a certain way, which tends to exclude and narrow the higher you go. And I've seen that not just from gender, but from ethnicity as well. And also, as we're starting to see changes in the workplace, you're going to see generational, multi-generation. I think it's the first time you're going to have like 5 generations in one workplace, which is pretty mind-blowing. So something to think about that when we're talking about the neurodiverse identities and challenges and needs, actually. Sorry.
And can I come? I think, Tristi, you're right there. And I think it's about performance. It's really interesting when you've got, like, for me, running data teams, that when you get people who are neurodiverse and how performance is judged. Because often, when you're looking at grading of how well they've done, you might sit around and go, well, I've seen them present and stuff. Well, somebody who's autistic, who's amazing at coding, won't want to be presenting to the senior leadership team. That doesn't mean they're any less than the ones who are amazing at presenting. It's about that diversity across the skills and how you represent that. So it shouldn't just be a one size fits all, that we should be acknowledging people for their technical performance as well, and not just this I suppose old fashioned way of what you expect about visibility, or I don't know. It's really interesting when you start looking at it like that, because actually I think we just need a better way of judging performance, and just being more open to that difference. And I bet, Prerna, you're probably from
yes,
a HR perspective.
I wanted to talk a little bit on that, because, like, our performance management systems have to change fundamentally. Yeah, I mean, you can't put numbers to the different skills and ability people bring on board. And so more importantly, triangulation of that data which we gather about employee performance, the timely feedback which we provide to people, and the different abilities they have could work well for organizations. And for that, we really need to create that allyship kind of network where people feel supported, or like-minded people can come together. We have special interest group, and that makes a lot of difference. And having that right role model for somebody who's slightly different than others, and it's okay to not fit into that work culture or environment, still be able to bring distinctive value, and that value being evaluated in a different way is something which we really need to kind of so in nutshell, we really need to change our recruitment processes, our performance management processes, and as well as culture of our organization, so that everybody feels welcome with different capabilities. That is what HR has to do. And we really need to kind of change the curriculum for HR to understand what is happening within the society, how the society is changing, and how technology is changing, how skill sets are changing, and why and how we really need different practices to make everybody feel welcome and create that sense of belonging for everybody.
Yeah, there is. I was going to just say, Nic, is it okay? Just a couple of practical, specific things I've noticed to support or enable, that are attempted to support or enable neurodiverse candidates during recruitment. One of them is that they get the questions in advance. So I've noticed quite a wide variation in the amount of time given. Also, they might be given extra time to be able to answer a question in let's say a hybrid video type call. Again, quite a wide variation. So if we could start to set some what does good look like for this, that would be really good. The other one is, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but an increase in the use of video submissions for their recruitment questions, or the application questions. And I know that from some of my mentees that actually that approach to have to record your answer and a video is incredibly stressful. And then when you're in role, again, presentation seems to be an important quality for people to progress, that visibility thing. Why not allow them to record if they wanted to record? That way they could re-record their presentation instead of having to do it live. Why not enable colleagues to be able to attend without the camera on, recognizing that they're very uncomfortable with that? I mean, I think part of that has to start with what do they think might help, and therefore, rather than making it an adaptation or an accommodation, actually make it an offer so that this is standard practice. And when we normalize those kinds of opportunities and the ways of delivering and designing and delivering our work, then that I think would go some way to actually improving the workplace.
Thanks, Tristi. And I think we've talked.
I would like to come back again. What they call it as a reasonable adjustments to accommodate people's need. I mean, for example, in our university setting, if we have students who are differently able, we try to kind of provide them handouts beforehand, or maybe use bold fonts and kind of accommodate different needs. Yeah.
And so we've talked about recruitment and some of the things around performance management. We've got a question in the Q&A panel about how do we look after the diversity we already have, which might be some of the ideas that Tristi was talking about in terms of making the workplace more inclusive. But there are any thoughts from anyone on other things that people can be doing to look after our talent that has a broad diversity?
I think it is about that inclusion, isn't it? I think it's interesting because sometimes there's almost like microclimates within an organisation. And I think, I know I've worked in organisations where it's been quite male dominated, and it's been quite almost like American footballish, quite teeny for them. But for those on the outside, it didn't feel teeny. So they'd be really shocked actually to think that it wasn't inclusive, because I think they'd probably feel that it was. It's only when you're on the outside you see that. So I think some of that is about that inclusion and talking about things actually, because no one group wants to feel excluded, do they? It's all about that coming together. So inclusion is really important no matter what it is, but you've got to have those conversations and do those different perspectives and talk about things in those communities. So there's a better understanding of all the different aspects of inclusion.
Seeing nodding going along. Prerna, did you want to come in?
Yeah.
Or Tristi?
Yeah, so I mean, about inclusion, we use various interventions, yeah, and able to be providing what intervention works best for your organization and what is the return on your investment for your intervention. Say, for example, you are having more trainings in the EDI space. Have the training helped employees to improve their performance? Or has our turnaround or employee leaving the organization has reduced? These are various ways where you could use those interventions and try to work those interventions with numbers, yeah? Or say, for example, if you have had exit interviews, what does your data say? Why people are leaving? Are we doing enough for people to stay within the organization and create that sense of belonging? Do we have enough mentoring programs? Or for example, within my organization, say, we have a Black woman mentoring a white young man and sharing those experiences, or creating that solidarity networks of race and equality, or maybe ethnic minority, or maybe teaching staff, non-teaching staff. How do these various networks work? And are we even providing enough spaces for them to network together and build that allyship, which would be useful for organization and which would be useful for building a brand for our organization? And as I said, that diversity attracts more diversity. So once people think that, you are an organization to work for, definitely it adds value.
I was going to say, I think sometimes,
I think with diversity, innovation is what we're talking about with data a lot of the time. And actually you can't innovate if you've got the same point of view. You'll just continue to do the same thing over and over again. So having that diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity across all characteristics and elements gives you that innovation straight away, that ability to make things better. Just a reminder, feel free to add questions into the Q&A panel. We will come around to those. But Lisa, sorry, I jumped in front of you. So
yeah, no, it's all right. I was going to say, because sometimes I think with that, with the inclusion things, because obviously people are coming from a different perspective, and sometimes you can get that conflict. And I think that conflict, professional conflict, I always say it's the grit and the oyster that gets the pearl. So actually those different perspectives are, and that's why those companies do better actually, because there's an acknowledgement that not everybody's got the same think. So you are challenging the way you think about things, and that's a good thing. So I think it's for all of us to challenge ourselves really, that when you do get some of those conflicts, actually it's about creating that pearl. It's not about that you can't handle it. You just need to do it in a professional way.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. We have a question that's come in on the Q&A. So we've seen a huge amount of talk to pave the way for new young talent in data and digital, but it's not always filtered down into procurement or operating models. Is there anything that you think organizations or we in general can do to help with this? Anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind taking that one, because I work with generations and young employees. And I strongly argue that, we really need to create that sensitivity when students come within the organization, when they work with fellow students from different teams and different ethnic minorities and different nationalities, and, creating that environment or teaching them the importance, because these are the people who are going to go and practice within organizations. So recognizing the importance of creating a cohesive workforce definitely helps. And also organizations being very clear about now we work with 4 generations together, and each generation brings their own skill sets and their tacit knowledge. So how do we make sure that they understand each other? So allyship, solidarity program, mentoring program, and also leadership playing an important role in changing the rhetoric and bringing in that vocabulary within the organization that this is what we are going to see ourselves in 4 years or 5 years, or when you're talking about building a leadership for ethnic minority or BEM community or whatever it could be. How does that happen? It's a slow process. So we really need to be clear on what diversity cohort are we actually trying to look at and why, and how improving that diversity cohort is going to add to our bottom lines. What tools and interventions are we going to use for that? And how do we use or how do we measure the interventions are being successful? What are your pointers to measure the success? Because you can't be using models all the time. There has to be some shared understanding of, if I'm improving the cohort diversity of X or Y cohort, this is what I'm trying to achieve from my organization output. So that is which we really need to look at from a human resources perspective, or building that right culture.
Yeah, and I think one thing we've certainly seen from the kind of commercial procurement side is working in partnership models or collaborative models with smaller suppliers, rather than necessarily always going for the large organizations, gives you that diversity in terms of bringing people in, and also giving the ability for people in your own team to pick up skills from working in that partnership model that perhaps they wouldn't have done if a service contractor just went off and delivered out of the office and wasn't integrated with the team. I see, Tristi, you put a couple of comments into the chat. Did you want to come on this topic?
No, it's okay. I'm just supporting what all of you have said. Just thought I'd add it in the chats as well.
Great, thank you. So we've talked quite a lot about careers and about the different aspects of diversity in data. I was just wanting to move on to some of the other areas that we had our speakers talking about. One of those was around kind of the visualization of data and how we can make sure that the data that we're making available and using is accessible and inclusive in terms of how it is portrayed and shown. So Lisa, are you seeing anything with the sort of work that the ODI have been doing in terms of making sure the visualization of data is inclusive?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at the visualization of data, so coming from my past, I used to work at Ordnance Survey. When you look at maps, you suddenly see, like some of the countries being smaller than others when they're not proportional. So it's really interesting how some of those biases come into even something like that. So I think there's got to be acknowledgement, isn't there, that actually when you're portraying that data, that you're looking for that inclusion, because actually that's quite a perpetual thing with the maps. You can see it all over, and then once you get your eye in, you can spot it all over the place. But if you're not aware to look for it, suddenly you'll just take it as read. So I haven't seen such a big movement around that, but I think it is something that we should really question all the time. Maybe we should do a gamey thing about look at that map and do a comparison to just start bringing it to people's attention, and then you can start spotting it as well.
Yeah. And Prerna, are you seeing this in academia in terms of how data is used visually and the links with diversity?
I mean, there are various ways data can be looked at and data can be interpreted. And my argument is, as human resource management professionals, we, as a function, we are touchy, woolly, feely, and we are more data averse. We don't talk in numbers. But we really need to challenge our curriculum. We really need to teach our practitioners how to visualize the data, how do you interpret the data, and you really don't need to be a data scientist. Data visualization definitely tells you a lot of stories. You can, and it's like the data of your organization is like a selfie of your organization. Looking at various cohorts, you will know what's happening within your organization, why some of the cohorts are underrepresented, what could be the reasons? Are there any reasons in your recruitment or performance management or various other issues? Yeah. So for me, it's giving the right training for our students in schools and in university sectors to play around with the data, to visualize that data, and to be able to tell a coherent story using that data. I will give an example. I mean, within organizations, we have people coming from different ethnic backgrounds and education backgrounds, different skill sets. Yeah. And looking at that data, you will be able to know what's happening in that organization. That was one point. And also, helping HR to learn the data is something which is important.
Do you see similar things, Tristi, in sort of healthcare? Because data must be a growing sort of place where you can add value to the sort of services that patients are getting.
I think it's actually an explosion over the last couple of years, being in the NHS and seeing the use of data for describing, how much progress is being made, for example, on COVID vaccinations. There's also a lot of use of data and visualization for performance reporting. Favorite topic, right? There's something about making sure that if we're talking about the visualizing data, that we do have some understanding of the appropriate use of graphs, the gotchas and the types of graphs that you should use, so that if you are doing a quick glance at something, that you haven't misinterpreted the data. There's something about making sure that the sourcing of a good practice around visualizations, right? That you sourced your data so that people, if they wanted to go and look at the source data, they could. There's some fabulous examples of being able to use the visualization of data for storytelling, which is also brilliant for being able to bring different voices into the use of data and making sense of it from a qualitative perspective. But the big gotcha is this: I love a good dashboard, but what I'm also very conscious of with dashboards is it's a point in time. So while we can wonder at the amazingness of bringing all of these different, bringing in probably lots of different data sources together, there's something about the challenge of understanding what are the caveats of that dashboard, because usually, I don't know if anyone's been on Tableau or use any of those, dashboards only have a certain set of information, and what they don't have is an interpretation of what you see. Therefore, you're open to interpret it as you like, in any way you like, and then take that away because you've had access to the dashboard. So I would just be mindful of that. And I would also be mindful, I have not seen anyone actually interrogate the accessibility of dashboards for those that are using screen readers or other types of tools for accessibility. And that does worry me a bit if we are moving to the visualization of data for some, but not all.
Thank you. And we've just got a related question in around, are there any best practices for data visualization and also the data sourcing that you just mentioned, Tristi? So opening that up and seeing perhaps Lisa from an ODI point of view, are there anything that you've seen on best practice for data visualization in terms of diversity?
Well, I was about to put one of the ones, I don't know, actually, it'd be really interesting to see how well it comes out for diversity. But as far as data viz is concerned, this one's data-driven documents is pretty good when you look at all the different types of data. But I think it's what Tristi was saying. A lot of this is about the rules that go in it. We've all seen the misrepresented graph, where they change the timeline, or, something changes and it shifts and suddenly that's not the best. I know The Guardian does some really good stuff on data visualization. And someone else has just said about ONS, about accessible dashboards. So yeah, I think you can probably crowdsource quite a lot of this in the data viz and how to do it, but there's probably some guardrails that's needed really to try and help people think about it when they're presenting data.
Prerna, Tristi, anything that you've seen in that area?
Yeah, I mean, data transparency and confidentiality becomes very important. For example, many times it becomes easy for people to trace back where the data has come from. And many times people don't share their views because they really don't want to be identified. So we need to kind of, be careful about anonymity, more than anonymity, data transparency, why that data is used, where that data sits in, how that data is stored. If people get that confidence that my data is not going to be misused, yeah, they would feel comfortable sharing their data. And more importantly, anonymity or confidentiality, because we may have the data anonymous, but still can be traced back. So confidentiality within your data is important. Following your ethical practices becomes a crucial part in collecting data or disseminating data or using that data, or for that matter, sharing that data with third party for modeling or interpretation, or whatever that reason could be for you to share that data.
Thanks, Prerna. And we're getting some really helpful comments in the chat. So I think it might be one of the areas where we'll pull some of the suggestions out of the chat and put them in a LinkedIn post later on and see if we can crowdsource any other best practice ideas, because that seems like an area that people are really interested in. So we use the power of the collective brain there. And so we've talked a lot about the kind of visualization aspect now, but kind of going back to the basics, if you like, how do we remove bias from data? Can we remove bias from data? To what extent can we? Lisa, do you want to start us off on that after the sort of ethics angles that you were talking about this morning?
Yeah, I think it's starting off by trying to understand what you're trying to do and the data sources you've got. I think all data is going to have a bias in it. It's just how considerable that bias is. So I think you need to understand that it's never going to be perfect, but you do need to make sure that you go a long way to mitigating some of those, so you don't do the lazy thing and just, go for one group rather than representing all. So I think, I don't think you're ever going to get rid of it totally, but you can do mitigation. So it could be that the way you source your data, it could be actually the engagement you get with the community. It could be the way that you collect, there's things you can do the mitigators. So I went through obviously this morning on the data ethics canvas and some of those things that you can think about. So that's definitely would be my first stop, would be to look at those things, but understanding actually, it's like anything, you can never get perfect data on this one, but actually you need to go a long way to make sure that you are looking at the negative and the positive impacts that you can have, and really consider it hard.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Tristi, did you have any thoughts on removing bias?
I think the only thing that I might be able to add is there's something about enabling the culture to capture what we think the bias or what we're worried about in the evolution of the product, and that we have a place to be able to go back and check that. So I think almost all of the data engineers I've ever come across, they are all trying to do the very best they can to recognize their bias, but I found it to be an internal process. They didn't necessarily feel that they could bring that out into a group or a team. So where maybe good practice could actually identify ways to be able to capture that, to explore it, then we could approach it as, and these are the areas that we want to try to improve on. We've called that out. We've made it also transparent to others, so that when we're doing an assurance or audit kind of thing, we've actually have some documentation. This is where we would like to be able to improve. There was one more thought, but I'm going to stop there and pass over to someone else.
Thanks, Tristi. Prerna?
Yeah, I mean, we can't 100% get rid of the AI biases or data biases, but only thing is we can work around to minimize the ill effect of those biases. Say, for example, when you are collecting data, make sure that you gather the data from various sources and triangulate the data, and more importantly, involve all the parties in creating those algorithms, as I said. And for example, when you're recruiting somebody, and if you want to kind of, celebrate somebody's neurodiversity or differences in your recruitment, make sure that you have a balanced panel while you're recruiting somebody. Or training programs, you need to kind of, have training programs which would be useful for people to mitigate those biases. So that is something as HR professionals we could do, that we could minimize those biases by bringing in more transparency, by bringing in more power, balance of power within your processes and systems. That is something which we could look at. Yeah. And there's again an element of equity, looking at people who have been historically disadvantaged, and how do you kind of, deal with those issues, and how do you combat that issues with your organizational practices and processes?
Where do people think the line is? So we've got a question here, is what if the bias is really so deep that the data is fundamentally flawed? At what point do you say you can't pursue the product or the analysis that you're looking into ethically? Where's that line, Lisa?
I think it's when you have to look at the harms that go on by using that. And if I mean, it just made me think about that the menopause drug that they tested on men like years ago, and then obviously then you're going to use it on women, and it's really untested, isn't it? Really untested on women and the impact it has. So for me, there's got to be some red lines in there, but it's about assessing the harm, because I think sometimes people use, and we've done some stuff on data assurance about like those sharing the data and those using the data, and we were asking, you know, who had most motivation? Is it those sharing the data, they wanted to be assured that it was right? I mean, right meaning like ethically, quality, sustainably, all of those things, not just, you know, quality and accuracy. Or is it the users? And actually the users had less incentive to make sure that it was right. It was the people who were sharing the data, they really wanted that compliance, they really want to be there, which isn't a little bit worrying then, because it means that people then are picking up data and using it with a bit of more of a cavalier attitude, which is concerning. So these guardrails do need to be in place, and there do need to be some red lines, and that's looking at, I suppose it's the context. And everybody says in the data world, doesn't it, context is key, and I think it is for this. And you need to evaluate the harms. And if you've got absolutely no other data source and it's going to be a minimum impact on people, then you might use it. But I think you need to evaluate on a case-by-case basis, but there definitely needs to be some red lines in that, because I just don't think it's okay to go ahead with everything.
Nic, I would like to add to that, sharing my personal experience. I mean, I think that the onus is on each one of us who is part of any or every organization, so to say. We had an alumni network meeting, and some T-shirts were distributed, and female body are different than male, yeah? And those T-shirts did not fit us. And there was a hue and cry. And the organizers who ordered those T-shirts, they said, had you told us that we needed T-shirts of different size? So some of the biases are so much culturally embedded, and we really need to bring those biases, challenge those biases, and educate people who are unaware of unconscious biases which they are carrying in their day-to-day practices. If you would have looked at that Invisible Woman, where they have kind of shared that data and challenge those practices. So we have to kind of, take the responsibility of challenging those practices and educating people who may have unconscious biases. And for that, as I said, that allyship, mentoring program, and solidarity network definitely help to kind of, share those experiences and create education for people who may be unaware.
Thank you. That's a really, really important point. So we're coming towards the top of the hour. So just a reminder, we probably have time for one more question. If anyone's got one, to stick it into the Q&A panel. But whilst people are having a think about that, I'm going to ask you all one last sort of thought. If there was one thing that you could do to improve diversity in data, what would it be? And Prerna, I'll ask you first, as you're on the mic.
Okay. So EDI space have moved at a rapid rate, and we have seen that it's growing. But for me, the future is in science and art of using technology in gathering the right data ethically, and also making sense of data and making that data usable for further strengthening our EDI practices. That is what my takeaway is.
Thank you. Tristi?
I think there's something that I've been messaging across, which is something to do with the curvy path a bit. It's recognizing that when we talk about it, we talked about diversity and data from the very beginning. What did it mean to us? It meant something different, I think, similar but different. They were connected. There's something about pacing our data and our transformation initiatives with society, because it is moving so quickly, and that where folks are and communities are not in that same pace, that we're helping support them with the right types of support that they need, actually, to be able to be fully engaged. Because I think the question that I don't know that we have the debate on in society is, what does a just digitally enabled society look like? My biggest worry about data, so I'm sorry, Nick, I'm just going to say this one, is cumulative harm, because Lisa talks about harm there, but there's something about all of these different things happening simultaneously and at different times, right? So that how they might impact you, and nobody will know that but you. So if you think about something like identity theft, if it happens to you, actually it's the individual that needs to go through the process. You have very little institutional or structural or policy support. And yet all of that happens outside of you. So you just feel the impact. So, I'll stop there and just put out the warning about cumulative harm, which actually comes from child abuse.
Some great thoughts. So Lisa, the last word to you. What would be the one thing you do to improve diversity in data?
See, I think I always start with the people, which is funny for a director of data, because actually, as I said earlier, we're all made up of the stories we tell ourselves, our experiences. And if we can share those with each other, actually, then it helps to generate that understanding and the light bulb moment that goes on. So I just think that it's about the people and about more talking and about more awareness of this. And so if you can sit down with your data engineers or your data management requirement specialists, or whoever they are, and look at that diversity of your team and start talking about those different experiences and then how that knocks on those ramifications, I think that would be the first place that I'd definitely start, because you want those light bulb moments for people to really understand those different perspectives.
Thank you. You've got lots of people nodding there. So I think what we've shown over the last hour is that the topic, just in the nature of the word, is diverse, right? And there are so many different aspects that we should all be thinking about. But I think the one consistent thing across all of those is we all agree on the importance of diversity in data, but in diversity in organizations as a broader aspect to be able to make that diversity in data work. So thank you so much to all three of you for your talks earlier in the week, but also for taking up the sort of last working hour of a Friday afternoon on what I'm sure has been a really busy week for people with the sun outside, where everybody is looking forward to heading out outdoors perhaps before the sun goes down. So thank you from me, and I think we're going to briefly hand back to Ed to wrap up the week.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Excellent facilitation there, and thanks, panel, for all your input. Really lively discussion, and really adding value to the conversation we've been having all week. Yeah, the reflection that I've got is that there is a long path. I think everybody said that there's a business case to be had here, which is always appealing to people who are in leadership of business, that actually, it's cost effective, or it's kind of how you fill the skills gap. And we've heard all those things this week. So that's it's been really inspiring. Well, thanks to everybody for listening. We will be collating the recordings of all the different sessions and putting them together in a sort of a package that we can share with folks after this, so that the conversations can continue. I hope that people have made connections with between the different organizations and with the individual on here, that the conversation can continue, because it really does have to. But it's such a positive feeling that I come out with after the week of discussion, that is, I've said it many times, and I don't want to overdo it, but it really has been inspiring. So yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to close it down now, and I hope everybody has a great weekend, and thanks for attending, and thanks for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.